Hey fellow gamers, it's me, Mario. Another day, another video. Today we're going to talk about the importance of being first. Turn order matters. This is a quotation, by the way. I don't know if you know Oscar Wilde. But yeah, in board games in general, in Euro games in particular, being first is quite important most of the time, but it's a good idea to start knowing how important it is and what you can do to change the turn order or maybe to just play in a later position without losing your advantage. It's not easy because it takes some time. Like most of the time, I just try to be the first player. I have to say that. But it's important to play even in other turn order position. But let's not get ahead of myself here and let's talk through each point. So there are basically two main groups of Euro games, the one with a fixed turn order and the one where the turn order is not fixed. Um, in the first category falls every game like Great Western Trail, Boone Lake, Maracaibo, they are all Feaster's game. Um, Viscount of the West Kingdom. There are Cryo. There are a lot of games where the turn order is going to be the same the whole time. This is normally because they are not divided into rounds. So the turn order is the same from the start because basically it's just a continuum. You know, players are just going to play after each other, and after some time, it won't matter too much who was the first player. That said, it's still important to know how to play in different positions. So the first bullet point is adapt your strategy to your position. By that I mean normally in Euro games, if the turn order is fixed, there are some the player later in turn order are going to get resources, right? Like in Great Western Trade, it's more coins. In Cryo, is more resources. Every game have Every game has got a different way to help the players later in turn order. And you have to use that as your strength if you're like the fourth player in a four-player game, which is not always easy. Let's just take a look at what you should do or what it's easier to do if you're the first player. You can force more and pivot less. By that I mean, by being first, you're the first one that can make important choices on the board normally. So you can already carve your path towards your goal. So you can choose a strategy right from the start. You don't have to right from the first move, but let's say that you're in the driving seat to be the one who chooses a strategy first. That normally means that you can go for the strongest strategy that you can find on the starting setup. So it's a pretty good position to be in, of course. It's something that most people like because it feels free, right? You have a lot of freedom. You can choose whatever action you want, and it's going to be good. But there's also a burden on your shoulders. Again, you don't have the same advantage in resources that the later players get. So you should really try to make your first choice matter a lot. And it's not always that easy. You have to make correct guesses. It's something that I like a lot to do, but I also like to adapt more. So last, force the end of the game. That's something that in most games you can do. Most games, like in Great Western Trail, whoever gets the 2 points token will start the end of the game. But in many other games, all the players will have the same number of actions. So let's say you're the fourth player. If you're going to be the one who triggers the end of the game, in many games you're the one who's going to take the last action. That's already pretty important. It's something to keep in mind towards the end of the game. Instead, regarding the start of the game, you can see what your opponents did and you can be the minority, as we saw in the last video. You can try to find an open lane while the other guys are fighting for something else. Not only that, you normally have again more resources, so you can use them to jumpstart your economy right at the start of the game. So being fourth means also making more informed choices. Like the first player goes into a new game, he has to make a choice. It has to be a strong choice because he's basically paying to be the first player on that round, on that position. But if you're the fourth player, you can make more informed choice. You may have some idea of what your opponents are going for, and that is also pretty important. So fourth player, more resources, more informed choices, and can force the end of the game. Non-fixed turn order, which means you can change the turn order normally by taking some actions. The first thing you should do is determine the opportunity cost. In some, like in Agricola, sometimes the board is so devoid of resources at some point that taking the first player is very good. You are also going to tackle onto it normally in action. In Agricola is playing a minor. In many other games, you are just going to get coins or some kind of resource. So determining the opportunity cost is pretty important. So understanding what you're giving up to take that action. Like in Darwin's Journey, sometimes it's really the best thing to do because coins are that important. So it depends a lot, but you should do that every time. Determine the opportunity cost. Then plan tactical moves. You don't have to be the starting player if you don't have a plan for the next round. Like this is something that happens a lot playing against beginners. They just take the first player because they want to be first, but they don't have a plan for that. You have to find a strong plan for the next round. Otherwise, it's still too costly to use an action to be the first player. So find a really strong action and be sure that you can take it. And a last point, which is very important, is that you can manipulate time a bit. I said double turns, which means that if you're the last player and you become the first player, you can also take two action in a row. Sometimes that's not true. It depends on the game. In some games, the action to be first gets chosen as your last action, which makes it a bit worse. But if you can take the starting player action and then take another action, you can effectively take two action in a row that can be uninterrupted, so the other players cannot do anything in between them. And in many games, that's very strong. It is so in Mombasa, it is so in Darwin's Journey. I think it's something that should be kept in mind while taking double action. So the opportunity cost is important. You have to have a strong action on the next round, and you can plan to take multiple actions in a row. Some general tips. I think you should be confident playing in any position, which means that you should experiment with both ends of the spectrum. I like force myself sometimes. We play with an auction many times, but in Great Western Trail I did it a lot because I didn't feel confident enough playing in the fourth seat. So I tried actively to play in the last positions because I wanted to know what it felt like. I want to explore new ways. For a long time in Great Western Trail, being the fourth player was like a big handicap. It was a big problem for anybody playing in because the other guys may have chosen already a strategic path and you were left with an uphill battle against them. So you should experiment with being last. You should experiment with having more resources but less choices. And you should try to come up with a reasonable way to play in the fourth seat. It's the same that I did in Agricola after a lot of players better than me that play a lot online told me that starting player is not as important as I thought it was. So I basically forced myself to not take the first player action other than maybe once or twice in a game. Probably that's too extreme, but it was to force myself to play in a different position so that I can understand I lost a few of these games because it's hard sometimes to go against what you already know. You are exploring something new, and even if you know the game pretty well, it's not always easy to do so. And for the same reason, I suggest you to do a starting auction and analyze after the game. I think doing an auction works really well in most Euro games, betting points, because points normally are not a factor in game. In Darwin's Journey, any other game, they might be, but normally they are not a big factor while you're playing the game. They're not an asset normally. So doing a starting auction can tell you a lot how important the starting position is in a certain game. It's more important when the turn order cannot be changed in a game, of course, like in Great Master Trail again, or in Maracaibo or Boon Lake. But it can be pretty important in Agricola too, even though in Agricola, given that you get only a few points by the end of the game, 40 or 50, it may be too costly to do a starting auction. But I think it's something that can be good anyway, because if you don't think it's important, you can just bet zero, and if everybody bets zero, I mean, it's still fine. You did an auction and nobody wanted to pay anything to be first. Also, doing an auction might make you feel less bad being in a fourth seat because the other players paid points to be in the starting positions. So it should both feel good and you can explore and experiment more in being last. All right, that's it. Today, 10 minutes again. See you in the next video. Bye bye. Mario's out.